get it done in 6 years. And I think by the time, biennium 3 comes around, those discussions will be pretty serious. I don't know if Fred I'm monitoring. I think it's going to be something that's going to be huge, extending long term. But maybe Fred or Troy can speak to it a little bit more.
Well, as far as monitoring, one of the things that comes up a lot in the partnership is assessing the meta population and the ability for fish from one creek to be able to make it over to another creek. Of course, that depends on lakes being full for that to happen, but there is a desire to monitor that possibly through pit tags, to be able to see whether the whole system is functioning the way we think it should be functioning, the way it did prior to irrigation development. So that might be one aspect that we do monitoring wise in the future. The whole Deep Creek irrigation network is something we're going to need to address. Not necessarily wasn't on our FIP radar initially, but what we do there, whether we're able to provide a few more miles of habitat in Deep Creek, which is already sort of limited in the amount of habitat available, and to increase the resilience of that population. That's probably going to be something we're going to need to address soon as well.
Yeah, I think the last component too is just the relationships that have been built over the last number of years, and even going back to Chris's time when Fish and Wildlife Service or ODF&W or the TNC were working in the basin. It's we're trying to show that we have a vested interest in recovering the species, and the water users and private landowners should have a vested interest, and they do. They have an interest in what happens in the future, and they see the increased flexibility with their operations if a species is delisted. And I think just trying to go beyond that, it's just trying to save a fish. It's trying to improve just the functionality of the system, whether it's for fish passage or for ranch resiliency. And that's been one of the benefits to the water users, because we're able to go in and help them replace antiquated infrastructure that's either no longer safe to operate or doesn't, it's more difficult to manage than it was in the past. So, again, it comes down to, the restoration side is difficult, but developing those human relationships is, sometimes difficult, but really an important part of these projects, of the program.
Yeah, it's just struck me in the time that I've been at OWEB. I used to talk about resource management. I mean, that was just like the natural way I talked about it. My degree was in resource management. And I've tried to start changing that mindset and vocabulary to stewardship, because it's so interrelated. And in several of the presentations, it struck me, it's like, on-farm maintenance. It never stops. There's always something that you need to go back because there's a lifespan or something changes. And so I was thinking about it, especially in this realm of, how do you keep it going? Because you will do things and something will change in it, and something will need some on-farm stewardship, repair, system stewardship.
Right. And I would say, with the designs and the projects and what they, with River Design Group coming up with, and the water users and everybody kind of talking about, that's what we're looking at with these projects is, it's not something that's going to last 10 years. Like, we're doing these projects. Let's get something that's going to last the next, half century, hopefully longer than that, but, the longevity of it all. And so I would say, with these fish passage projects, that's, what we're shooting for too, is, making sure that they have that long-term, endurance.
All right, so I am trying to wrap this up. So Mark, because we have a presentation, we have lunch, and then we have the state forester coming in at 1, so we have to be back here at 1. So I'm trying to do some meeting management here. So Mark, go ahead.
Quick answer to Lindsay's question. I talked to Sean Clemens at ODF&W. They'll take a look at the applications, and if there's the quality of the applications, and if there's money left over, they will extend the grant for a period of time and ask for more solicitation. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Now you put the pressure on us.
But that was a good question. That's really good to know too.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for your presentations, Fred, Troy, and Brandy, and keep going.
All right. Thank you guys so much for
right.
having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think Eric thinks he can do this next presentation in a half hour. So is everybody okay with jumping into this presentation and then taking a quick half-hour lunch since we're all home? Is that okay?
And we can move my item M to the
Yes.
end of the meeting.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
an easy one.
Yep, exactly. All right, so Hartstein, you're up.
Great, thank you. Let me just share my screen really quick. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Sounds like it. So my name is Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator for the record with OWEB. And I'm here with OWEB Grant Program Manager Eric Williams to discuss item L, which is proposed revisions to the OWEB Grant Program Division 5 Administrative Rules, which if you're looking at your board book is on page 176. So for this agenda item, we'll first give a little background on the administrative rules and the rulemaking timeline. We'll note the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, or RAC, that played an important role in helping craft the proposed revisions to the rules before you. We'll walk through a summary of the proposed changes to the rules. Be sure to note the public comment process. And then we'll save time at the end, either of this presentation or sometime after lunch, for the board to review the proposed rules and ask questions. So with a little bit of background, OWEB's Division 5 rules are quite broad and generally cover the basics around the acceptance and consideration of grant applications to the agency. One way to look at the Division 5 rules are as an umbrella rule set with specific grant programs that have separate rule divisions nested under the Division 5 rules. So those other divisions contain more detailed rules specific to those grant programs. For example, we have administrative rules for each of the open solicitation grant types, as well as for the Focused Investment Partnership Grant Program. And the last time the board updated and revised the rules was in, the Division 5 rules was in 2017. So here we have the timeline for the Division 5 rulemaking. So this started a year ago, January of 22, where the board authorized staff to initiate rulemaking in Division 5. And in the spring, staff recruited and formed the Rulemaking Advisory Committee. And in the summer, we had 2 RAC meetings to discuss proposed revisions to the Division 5 rules. Both those meetings were live streamed and recorded on YouTube, as well as having public comments accepted. In November, we had our draft rules that were available for formal public comment. And now at this meeting, we're bringing the final draft rules to you for hopefully approval. So here's the list of our Rulemaking Advisory Committee members. We had applicants, grantees, as well as grant reviewers that helped OWEB craft the rule revisions. And these folks came from around the state, work in rural and urban areas, and all had unique perspectives to share. And I would say that they were incredibly helpful in running ideas by and honing the final rule language. And I want to publicly acknowledge them for their efforts. And I also should acknowledge the OWEB staff team that worked on revising the rules in addition to Eric Williams and I. We had April Mack, Liz Redon, Kobe Menton, and Denise Hoffert. So the proposed changes to the rules are a mix of both technical and substantive, and probably leaning more on the technical side, with maybe one big exception to that, which I'll get to in a moment. So to begin with the summary of proposed changes, as staff dug into the rules, we noticed that there were places throughout where we didn't think it accurately captured the roles the board and OWEB, the agency, played in the administrative process. So that's been clarified throughout the draft rules before you. We also looked to update the rules to better reflect current OWEB grant programs, as well as modernize the language to reflect that OWEB uses technical review teams to review all of OWEB's grant applications. So number 4 on this slide contains probably, I would say definitely, the most substantive proposed change. And that's removing the blanket 25% match requirement for all grant programs. Instead, having a match requirement not to exceed 25%, with the amounts to be provided when releasing a grant offering. The idea is that we would keep the 25% match requirement for restoration grants, but reduce it for other grant types, like technical assistance, monitoring, and stakeholder engagement, as those are traditionally more difficult to secure match funding. And we really saw this as an opportunity to address an equity issue in our grant making. This was a recommendation that also did come out of the tribal assessment report that's been before the board, I think in 2021. And finally on this slide, staff noted that there was a lot of language on requirements for grant applications, and we felt that could be simplified by just stating that the grant applications are to be submitted in the most current format. Most of what appears on this slide is really clarifying language in the rules. Includes that monitoring information collected and submitted to OWEB is a public record, that public colleges and universities outside Oregon are not eligible grant applicants. The idea being here that states in which those public colleges and universities reside are responsible for providing budgets for those institutions. That grant applications are complete as submitted, and that new information may only be sought by OWEB during the evaluation process. And we moved this to a different section in the rules. Looking to clarify the process for grantees to obtain the necessary permits and licenses for a project and submitting to OWEB, as well as the length of time a landowner may expect to provide access for monitoring a project, as well as for the grantee to maintain a project. And then spelling out in better detail the expectations for a landowner or easement holder with cooperative agreements with grantees, as well as the role public agencies play where public land is involved on OWEB projects. And finally, we feel that the proposed rules better outline the process for OWEB in releasing funds on project elements that require permits or licenses. Okay, so consistent with past rulemaking, we had the Department of Justice review the draft rules before they went out for public comment. And this is really just to ensure that we didn't miss anything from a legal perspective. And we did open the comment period on November 18th, where we also notified tribal governments that the draft rules were available for review and comment. And we had a virtual public hearing on December 21st. No comments were provided at this public hearing. However, we did have 2 written comments submitted prior to the December 30th deadline, and attachment B provides a summary of those comments, as well as the staff response which essentially is agreeing with the commenters and making the relevant changes to the draft rules. And if you're interested, attachment C are the full comments that were submitted. And I also want just as a reminder that in addition to the formal public comment period with each RAC meeting, we did accept public comment. And with that, we'll go next to see if there are questions or comments on the proposed rules themselves. But I want to see if we have time for that. I'm looking at Liza, Jane, and Barbara.
Yes, take the time you need, Eric.
Okay. Okay, so typically what we do is we walk through each of the sections of the rules and see if there are questions, comments, concerns, starting at the top in the purpose section. So attachment D has both the clean version of the final draft rules as well as the red line version. So I'm operating right now on the clean version, but let me know if you want to talk about anything on the red line version. There's differences there because we have each line numbered, and because the red line version has more content, the lines will be off a little bit. But before that, I do see that we go into that. I do see there's a couple of questions. So,
Okay,
Liz and Jamie.
great. Liz, go ahead, and Jamie to follow.
Eric, sometimes I just hone into looking at things that you preclude. And one of the things that you precluded was number 7 was out-of-state universities need not apply. And my question is, there's so much collaboration sometimes between universities in and out of state. With that, that wouldn't preclude an in-state entity that collaborates outstate. That wouldn't preclude them from applying? Okay.
Correct. The out-of-state colleges, universities could be partners. They just could not be the direct grant applicant.
Okay. And DOJ actually said that was okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you, Liz. Jamie.
Yeah, thank you, and for all the work that goes into this type of effort. A couple questions, 2 are more general, and then I'll just ask the other 2 that really kind of fall into the progression, but to give you a heads up on questions if you want to just touch on them when you get to those sections. First of all, you mentioned the formation and the RAC, and what a remarkable group of our traditional partners that were part of it. So our thanks to them for all their work. One of the things that we are talking about, really trying to challenge ourselves to do, is reach out to more non-traditional partners. And so I was wondering if there was an effort to include non-traditional partners in the RAC, because they may be able to provide input on some of those challenges we're finding to some of the potential barriers for non-traditional partners. And then I've got 4, so I don't know if you want me to run through all 4 questions or if you want me to take these one at a time.
I can
Jamie,
answer.
Yeah, we'll also deliberate on this after lunch. We're going to make room for that. So there'll be the room. I'm going to leave this up to Eric to decide how you want to answer that. You're just going to starve us all to death, but go ahead. We'll be okay.
Well, let me just then run through. Since there was a decision, Liza Jane, to ask the questions ahead of time,
Yes.
and that was the chairs did. I'll go ahead and ask all my 4 questions, and then you can either respond to them now or respond to them, at some point.
That's perfect.
The other was per Chris Gannon's comment before, and I thought it was very well taken about adding water quality. Question about that being included. I thought that was a really good point. You talked a bit about the role of OWEB and the board in that administrative role piece. And I was just wondering if you could expand upon what authority the board would be giving up. Some of these things make a lot of sense because it makes the system choppy and delays things to not just have Lisa go ahead and be able to make those decisions, but just trying to get some real kind of tangible, maybe a couple examples of what that might look like. And then the fourth is, and it's under the definition section number 4, when it's talking about the technical and interdisciplinary expertise on how that's defined. So a couple of years ago, I recall us having one of these conversations about when we were reviewing the criteria for some grants. We then took the effort, and this is something I raised and I appreciate being included, of including Indigenous knowledge as part of the assessment criteria, given the importance of understanding early baseline type conditions. So I'm just curious in terms of that section of technical and interdisciplinary expertise, if that definition includes our understanding of diverse communities and this Indigenous knowledge of watersheds as part of that criteria. So those are the questions that I had for the review of it. I want to just, if you want to answer them now or later, no problem on that.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. I'll start with the top, see how far we go. How about that? So you asked about the non-traditional partners and the RAC. So we had a bit of a challenge in RAC recruitment this time around. I think for a couple of reasons. One was it's just everybody was really busy. So this was also during a period where we were doing the engagement on the climate resolution. And so folks that were interested in OWEB rulemaking, we reached out to, and also they responded, oh, you're doing the climate rulemaking as well. Maybe I can pass on the Division 5 and be a part of the climate rulemaking RAC. So I think you might see more of that non-traditional lens on the climate RAC when that comes before the board.
Thank you. And if I can just say, just to flag one piece of that though, if these rules decide essentially who gets the money, then that's, I'll just flag that that's something we want to make sure that's part of our consideration process.
So as you asked the question about the board and staff and kind of the interchangeability throughout the rules. We did a pretty deep dive into each of these locations where we swapped out either the board or staff, or in some places included both. Usually it's in locations where, for example, the application requirement section that we had formerly, the applications must be submitted on the most current form prescribed by the board. So we acknowledge that the board doesn't actually develop the applications. That's something that's a role that staff play, is in developing the format of the application materials. So we were just looking really closely at, what are the roles the board is playing and what is the role that staff play. So, we looked really throughout these rules for that, and think we did a pretty good job. And that was one of the areas where we had DOJ, look at pretty carefully as well. The question about the technical review team expertise, does it include Indigenous knowledge? Absolutely. We have tribal reviewers on our technical review teams, and they're highly qualified, and we utilize their expertise throughout our grant programs. And then, Jamie, you had a question about water quality. I didn't quite catch that one.
Oh, well, thanks for all those really great responses. It was a part of the public comment that would raise the proposal to include water quality as one of the things that we focus resources on. And there may be some restrictions on the funding sources. It looks like, Lisa, you got your hand up, but it was just that idea of adding it because temperature, for example, it has an impact. So all of these things tie into our work, but it may be valuable to add that as one of the things that we're consciously thinking about for our projects.
So we do consciously think about water quality in our projects. I think Chris's comment was more toward FIP and those 7 priority areas that we've adopted previously. And we talked a little bit yesterday, if you remember, about we're coming up on a rule review for FIP. That I think would be the time and place that Chris was referring to.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so in our remaining 15 minutes, we'll see if we can make it through this. I will start at the top of the rules and see if there are any additional questions that board members have in addition to those that have been raised by Jamie and Liz. So starting with the purpose section, if you want to just raise your hand if you have a question in that, and we can return to it. So I see Meg, your hand is raised.
You're going to come back to
Okay.
this,
Yep.
Eric? We'll be talking now.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's okay. We'll go back to it. Definitions. I'm not seeing any. Application requirements. Not seeing. Oh, Meg. Yep. Application processing. Meg.
Can I just say that I think my questions will all be quick. I don't want to scare people.
Okay. Grant agreement conditions. Stephen, are you grant agreement conditions or?
Actually, I'm probably earlier than that. The statement that you wrote in there says match requirements shall not exceed 25% of the application. That means that OWEB will not demand more than 25%, but the applicant can certainly exceed that. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, grant agreement conditions. Not seeing any. Distribution of funds. Like no questions there.
Hey, Eric.
Waiver. Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
go back to Stephen's question? I think it's important that the board understand this. So I think the current rules required a 25% match. And I do a lot of rule waivers. It's something unique at OWEB that the director has the ability to waive rules. It's the only agency that I know of that has that ability to allow for less match in some places. And so I think the attempt was to put language in place that there wouldn't need to be nearly as many rule waivers around the match going forward. And that should help also, Jamie, towards equity and bringing in applicants that have less means to meet that 25% requirement that we've had.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for that. Okay, speaking of waiver of rules, we're on that section. There's questions. Mark. And then the last section is the periodic rules review and program evaluation. And not seeing questions there. So Meg, it sounds like your questions were pretty quick and you had them on the purpose, application requirements, and application processing
Right.
section.
So on the purpose section, I just wanted to make sure I understand what these rules apply to. And it looked, initially I thought it would look like maybe everything but FIPS. But I don't know about and other grant programs initiated by the board. What, help me with what categories these rules apply to.
Yes, they apply to all of OWEB grant programs. So we included the specific grant programs in the open solicitation grant program, and then added the other grant programs initiated by the board to include things like FIP or the drought and fire grant programs as well.
Okay, so the intention really is that they apply to all of the grant programs.
Yes, yes.
And Eric, do these apply to the Oregon Ag Heritage Program?
They do not apply to the
That's what
Oregon Ag Heritage Program because those have separate administrative rules.
Right. I just thought it was important to clarify that it's our general normal grant offerings. Ag Heritage is separate from.
And may I get a question on application requirements?
Well, it really is a question about match, and we've talked about it a little bit already, but I'm trying to think about how that's going to happen in practice. Right now, we have the waiver process. We have requirements, and then we have a waiver process. And in this revised version, for any applicant coming in, how do we create an expectation about what their matching requirement is going to be? Oh, they're included in the announcement which offering. Okay, sorry, I skipped that point. I didn't see that.
Yep.
And then if somebody is not, if there's a reason, the director can still waive that requirement under the waiver rules, whatever that.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. And then my last comment was really just, this is some serious nitpicking, but it's driving me nuts. I think one of the things that I'm in 0040 sub 4 under application processing. I think one of the things that the applications get evaluated for is completeness. And so I'm niggled by that word, they'll be considered complete as submitted, and wondering if there's another word that we could use there. Because is the agency going to decide whether an application is complete once it's once it's submitted?
Yeah, the idea here was that we didn't want new information to be coming in after the grant deadline, at a review team site visit, new maps and information being provided there, that we're considering the application complete when that applicant hits submit on the online application. And then if we do want information, and OWEB will reach out and try to get that information from the applicant.
I think
definitely open.
I was going to say, I think I saw somewhere that one of the things that OWEB is going to decide is whether an application is complete. And so I was just reacting to the use of the word that it will be considered complete, like it'll be considered final as submitted or closed as submitted or whatever. But if I'm mistaken about that determination of completeness, if that isn't something that happens once the application is submitted, then my comments don't make any sense, and it's fine to leave it as complete, I think.
So maybe I can help with this because I have a question about it, and this will help my knowledge as well. Once an application is submitted to us and it's past the deadline, do we or don't we go back and forth to get additional information? Or is what they've put in what they've put in, and if it's not adequate, we'll help them to come back in for the next time that offering comes about.
Eric, do you want me to take that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager. For open solicitation programs, we do not have a back and forth revisions process, and that is in service of the goal to maintain a fair and equitable competitive grant program. There are some exceptions to that. I would call them minor revisions. For example, if there was some mistake on the budget page, let's say an incorrect indirect cost rate or something like that, we do allow those minor revisions to be made, but only after the board decides whether or not to award the project. A difference, though, is in the Focused Investment Partnership Initiative. It is structured differently such that the partnerships are responsible for project selection. And so part of that technical review process, in fact, the main emphasis is on a revisions process where technical review might call out the need for some improvements or changes to an application, then it goes back. But in the competitive programs, we do not have a back and forth process like that, mainly to ensure an equitable process. And to get to Meg's earlier comments about completeness, there's a couple components to that. One is that the online application system does a large proportion of that job, because if there's a required element in an application that's not included, it won't let the applicant submit the application. If by chance an application is submitted in the online system, but something critical is missing, then we do those checks, as well as an eligibility check. So an application can be complete, but ineligible because it's not meeting the intent of the program and its rules. And so staff do both of those checks when applications come in the door.
Okay. Sounds like this word choice won't be a problem. I was seeing that applications will be reviewed based on application completeness and evaluation criteria. And that it sounded like we were deeming everything that got submitted as being complete. So that was I was in a loop there. But it sounds like you can't really submit an application that's not complete, or there will be rare circumstances when you could do that. So I'm good.
Hey, thank you, Meg,
Great.
for your questions. We have choices. Does anyone have more deliberation questions that they'd like to address before this goes to a vote? Mark.
Yeah, I think I was going to talk about the waiver, right? Rick? Okay, so I know I stand between everybody and lunch here, so I'm going to try to make this quick. But we have the statute, which is the overriding document, and then the OARs, which is where the rubber meets the road. And I'm always very, very cognizant of the time that staff spends drafting the rules, the technical review team reviewing the rules, the RAC going over the rules, the public comment. So I'm always a little bit leery about even recommending any changes. But I on page 189, I'll just read it. The director may waive the requirements of Division 5 unless they are required by statute for grants when doing so will result in a more efficient and effective implementation of the board's grant program. Any waiver grant shall be in writing and included in a permanent file. When I read that, I thought, wow, I've never heard of an agency director having that kind of authority to say, well, I'm going to throw out the OAR and here's what we're going to do. And that's too strong a wording. But I think Lisa partially answered my question is, yeah, she has that authority, and she might be the only one in state government that has that authority. So there's pros and cons to that. The pro is that probably Governor Kotek would be very happy because that's customer service at its best. But on the other hand, it needs to be really, really careful how we do that, because I don't want somebody to come back and say, well, you treated them a certain way. Now I want to be treated that way, or I want you to waive me too. So it's a worry for me. But all I need to hear Lisa say is, man, I'm not planning on using this very often. And if I do, I'm going to be really, really diligent in how I use that, because you have a tremendous amount of power to say, well, I'm not going to follow the OAR here, and here's the reasons why. So thoughts, Lisa, on that?
So I think those are very valid observations. And when I came over to OWEB, I was a little bit surprised by the ability to waive rules. That said, when those documents or requests come to me for waivers, there are a couple of things that I see. Typically, I see match requirements, and that would be lowering it for some entities. I'm trying to think of a couple other examples, but they're well documented with a reasoning for it. There's an entire form that comes to me that requests a waiver, what we're waiving, why we're waiving it, and why the recommendation is coming from staff to do so. I don't do a lot of them, but enough. I've done some with a few of the emergency grant programs as well, but it's there to try and, make it efficient and best accommodate getting the money on the ground. But they're used sparingly, Mark.
Okay, thank you. I'm okay.
But your nervousness, I get it. I was a little nervous when I saw the first one too.
Good questions. Any other comments? Don't feel rushed. We can come back. It's important. I don't see any. Can the chair entertain a motion? She'd like to.
I'll make the motion.
Thank
I move that the board approve the OWEB grant program administrative rules found in attachment D.
I'll second that, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. We have a motion by Barbara and a second by Mark. Is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 And any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Thank you. Thank you for that good presentation. I appreciate it, Eric and Eric.
Yeah, good work, you guys.
Yeah, good work. Okay, we'll take a 27-minute lunch. Please be back by 1, and we'll see you then. Have a good stretch.
Well, Liza Jane, I fed myself and the baby.
Me too, and we did 2 hot laps around the barn lot. I'm ready to go. I was getting a little down there, but
I needed some sugar.
yeah.
Hey, Lisa,
Yes.
I really appreciated Meg's words are important part of the, I'm not sure if everybody really grasped what she was saying on that complete thing, that if we say it's complete and then later on in our evaluation, we say you didn't match up, yours was not as complete as this one, because we use the same word, they say, wait a minute, that's impossible, because you have said when we all submitted them, they were complete. So I think I heard Meg asking for a slightly different word, or a different word, not having complete as a evaluation tool when we'd already used it to say they're all complete when you hit the submit button.
Let me go also start. Let me go play with my word thesaurus and
well,
see
Meg's,
if I can find
Meg's
another
on
word.
now, but I really was listening. Of course, I've had to listen to too many lawyers in my life, so maybe that's part of it. But I did appreciate it, Meg.
Well, it is kind of an occupational hazard. I can't read a sentence without without evaluating it for clarity and et cetera, et cetera. So, but I mean, I do, in practice, maybe we're never going to have an issue with this, but I do think, yeah, a word like your application is final, or it's closed, or it's anything other than complete might have.
Okay. Let me look. I will listen and look and contemplate a word.
Okay.
And you can change it on the other end as well. It doesn't matter. You just can't use the same word, one for evaluation,
Right.
one when you said they're all complete.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, thank you. We're at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for getting back, making your hot laps and getting some energy. We get to start out with our shared stewardship presentation. So Renee, I'll turn this to you.
Thank you, Liza Jane. Good afternoon, co-chairs, members of the board. For the record, Renee Davis, Fire, Klamath, and Drought Programs Manager at OWEB. We are on agenda item N, shared stewardship and the 20-year strategic plan. We're really pleased to have a few colleagues from Oregon Department of Forestry with us today. So State Forester Cal Mukamoto is here, as is Nathan Beckman, who is ODF Strategic Planning Coordinator. I don't see him on the screen yet, but I believe Ryan Gordon, who's ODF's Planning Branch Director, may join us in just a little bit for this discussion. So our two agencies have a long history of partnering on a whole host of different initiatives and efforts, harking back many years, multiple decades, to voluntary reporting associated with restoration work on forested landscapes. More recently, actually, probably, if I think back, probably going on 10 years ago, partnering on granting for forest collaboratives to help advance pace and scale of some of the fire resilience work out around the state in different locations. And now we're excited today to have the opportunity to talk with you about shared stewardship, which has been a few years in the making, and OWEB more recently has begun collaborating with ODF and others on that. So one piece I would mention is that some of the context of this work is associated with wildfire risk reduction treatments. Those were mentioned this morning when we had the great presentation from Terry and Marco about the rogue forest BIP. So perfect tee up for today's discussion. And really the opportunity here is to identify some and shared prioritized landscapes where those wildfire risk reduction treatments can happen, but overall in the context of increasing broader landscape resiliency. So really connecting to the core mission that OWEB has with its granting programs. So in terms of the structure for today, I'll turn it over to Lisa, see if she has anything to add just briefly. Then I believe Cal has a few remarks. Nathan will walk us through a relatively short, probably 25-minute or so presentation. If you could hold your questions until after the presentation is over, we should have 10 or 15 minutes at the end for lots of questions that the board likely will have about this initiative and some great discussion among the agencies. So I think with that, Lisa, anything to add in terms of frame up before we turn it over to Cal and Nathan?
Yeah, I'm really excited to bring this presentation to the board because we talk a lot about cross-agency work, cross-agency collaboration. What are other agencies doing in the areas that OWEB provides grants? And shared stewardship is one that I only became familiar with when I came to OWEB a little over a year ago. And I have had the pleasure of working with directors across the natural resource enterprise, as well as federal partners, and really thinking about how we look at landscape management and more holistically and preparing for a more resilient future. And so I think you'll find this interesting, and I've really enjoyed the time getting to know Director Mukamoto and working with him in his role at ODF and ODF. So thank you.
So with that, Cal, take it away, please. Thank you. I think you're muted, Cal.
They should have automatic unmute. Sorry. Good afternoon. My name is Cal Mukamoto, for the record. I am the Director of Oregon Department of Forestry and also known as the State Forester. Thank you for the invitation to join today's OWEB meeting and a board meeting and the opportunity to share progress on development of a 20-year strategy for landscape resiliency in Oregon. OWEB has made significant contributions to supporting the Oregon Way, building capacity for locally planned and led restoration projects that have impact on scale. This board, with such broad representation of local, state, and federal partners, is aware of the challenges and opportunities associated with working across the state diverse ecosystems and ownerships. As most of you are aware, SB 762, which was passed by the legislature in 2021, brought focus and resources to the state's efforts to address wildfire. The past 2 decades have seen a rapid escalation of severe fire behavior, home and property losses, higher suppression costs, and smoke impacts, mostly driven by climate change and a growing wildland-urban interface. In addition,
Cal, your audio muted again.
You know what? I think I touched the keyboard. I'm sorry. I have a degree in forestry and I also have a degree in business, not in technology, unfortunately. In addition to investments in capacity, direction to create new policies around development in the WUI and expanded authorities around prescribed fire and other restoration tools, SB 762 also directed the Department of Forestry to develop a 20-year strategy for landscape resiliency rooted in shared stewardship. In 2019, the state signed an MOU on shared stewardship with U.S. Forest Service and Natural Resources, with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. This MOU was the next iteration in a history of collaboration to address landscape management across the state's forest lands ecosystems. The MOU called on the state and federal agencies to set shared priorities for investment in landscape scale restoration. Today I'm pleased to introduce Nathan Beckman. Nathan and I worked on the same ranger district in Colorado. So great things happen in that district, who has been leading our efforts to development a framework for shared stewardship in Oregon and a 20-year landscape resiliency strategy intended to set priorities and focus investments and forest and range restoration across the state. Then I touched that. Okay, good. But this body of work, it builds on past efforts and accomplishments while advancing a paradigm shift in the way federal and state agencies work together. Today, I'd like to acknowledge not only Nathan's work, but the ongoing commitment from the governor's office, OWEB, and the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Oregon State University, and the U.S. Forest Service Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Bureau of Land Management, and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, along with facilitation and technical support from American Forests. And I'd also like to call out Lisa's participation, Director Hansen's participation in this, as she's been a valuable member of this group effort. And when you're taking that many agencies along to create a 20-year plan, it's not an easy task. And we're so lucky to have Lisa Hansen as representing OWEB and the state of Oregon on that team. The key to this strategy success will be its inclusiveness. A successful statewide strategy must be relevant to small rural communities, urban areas, and tribal communities, and those underserved populations that are so affected by wildfire. It's also challenging to align the priorities of so many state, federal, and local agencies attract and facilitate coordinated investments in Oregon's natural resources. The body of work Nathan will describe today is certainly going to change and mature over the next 20 years and beyond. So without any further delay, I will allow Nathan to give his presentation. Nathan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And Renee, I'm going to ask you to kind of be my eyes and ears here to make sure that we can see the presentation, and I'll go ahead and get started. Are we doing okay?
Yep, looks great. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Good to see some of you. I hope to meet the rest of you at some points here soon, but I am very excited to present this information. I really appreciate the introduction as well. I'm going to go ahead and go through this, hopefully about 20 minutes. There's a lot of information. This is a big body of work. And then we'll have some opportunity for questions and answers. And I'd also propose too is in future meetings, if there's more questions or more discussion, happily continue the conversation. So really beginning here. I also really wanted to note here that it's truly a collaborative effort. We've heard that a lot in the introduction. I'm really proud to present this work, but I must say that there's a lot of folks working on it. So it's really important to recognize all that work. And really what I want to do here is present to you kind of the backgrounds, where we are and where we're going. And just once again, recognizing that we do have more work to go here in the short term and long term. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump into it and provide some context. Kind of a story I think many of us know, but just to kind of start us off here. Really in the Western United States, seeing an escalation of catastrophic wildfires, right? Home and property losses, higher suppression costs, worsening conditions on the lands. Cal really framed that up, and I appreciate that. As a result, we're also seeing these fires are starting to change the conditions. We're limiting our recovery, really impacting our wildlife habitat, harming our drinking water and watersheds, and we're seeing more threats to our communities and our assets. What's really important to look at is that these trends are consistent in Oregon as well. Jumping into it, looking in 2002, which really changed a lot of the work that we're doing here, was the Biscuit Fire that started in Southwest Oregon. Some stats there is by November, it burned up nearly 500,000 acres and $150 million, becoming one of the largest wildfires in recent history. Then moving into 2007, we have the Eagly Complex, which is outside of Burns and consumed over 140,000 acres. Going into 2012, the Long Draw Fire in Southeast Oregon burned more than 550,000 acres and became the state's largest wildfire. In 2017, the Chetco Bar Fire burned 191,000 acres. It reburned portions of the 2002 Biscuit Fire and directly impacted lots of communities. In 2020, Oregon experienced its most devastating fire season in many years. More than 2,000 fires burned 1.2 million acres. 9 lives were lost. And along with that, more than 5,000 homes and commercial structures burned down. And in 2021, the Bootleg Fire burned over 13,000 acres and the state's largest fire in the history of Oregon, the third largest fire. Some interesting facts there is that during its fastest growth in mid-July, it grew about 1,000 acres per hour. It became the second largest wildfire in the United States in the 2021 wildfire season. Looking at the state and the wildfire history from 1992 to 2001, Oregon's wildfires burned an average 200,000 acres per year. From 2012 to 2020, the average skyrocketed to 650,000 acres per year. And beyond the impacts to public health and safety, the infrastructure, the natural resources, our worsening wildfire trends have ramifications on suppression costs and also exposure to Oregon's limited general funds. In 2015, the Oregon Department of Forestry spent over $500 million on large fire costs alone, and $2 billion have been spent fighting fires across all ownerships in Oregon. With the increasing size, the severity, a strategy needs to be put in place to reduce wildfire through creating and maintaining resilient landscapes. And that's really where we're starting this journey that we're on. Had briefly been mentioned in 2019, a shared stewardship MOU was signed between state and federal officials to document this commitment to work collaboratively and to create a shared stewardship approach for implementing land management actions in Oregon. What's really important to note there too is the 20-year strategic plan that reduces wildfire risk through restoration actions was a key element of the shared stewardship MOU. And then also in 2021, Governor Brown signed into law Senate Bill 762, which really directs ODF to design and implement a program to reduce wildfire risk through restoration of landscape resiliency and restoration and reduction of hazardous fuels on public and private forest lands and rangelands and in communities near homes and critical infrastructure. And what's really important to note is Senate Bill 762 also directs the department to develop a 20-year strategic plan as described in that 2019 shared stewardship MOU that prioritizes restoration actions and geographies for wildfire risk reduction, and really is to direct federal, state, and private investments in a tangible way. So really wanted to provide that background and want to show the journey that we've been on through the last year and then where we're going. So looking at our timeline that was developed, really wanted to start off with building a foundation. That was really important. And then we had laid out 4 general phases of work and really started with that build the foundation. And I want to jump into that information to provide some back context here as well. So what we really looked at was what are the key components of shared stewardship? We talked about the development and implementation of the 20-year strategy needs to be combined with a functioning governance structure and proper engagement and how we can advance and support implementation of shared priorities, coordinated actions, and investments. And that's how we believe that we can achieve healthy and resilient landscapes. The 2 key components, once again, the 20-year strategic plan that we've really been spearheading here is really intended to articulate shared priorities among state and federal agencies to achieve this vision. The other is the governance structure, which provides the forms of engagement, coordination amongst our federal, state, and local governments, our tribes, forest industries, environmental groups, other NGOs, partnerships and collaboratives. And really that governance structure and specifically the strategic leadership group that I'll hit on here soon also provides a forum for decision-making among state and federal agency leaders related to shared stewardship implementation. So really here, the 20-year strategic plan and the shared stewardship governance structure is the mechanisms for implementing shared stewardship in Oregon. Going into vision and strategic elements, the MOU that was signed talks about a shared vision of healthy and resilient forested ecosystems, vibrant local economies, healthy watersheds with functional aquatic habitat, and quality outdoor opportunities. During the initial planning phases, it was decided to simplify this into a vision statement and then looking into what are our strategic elements. And those strategic elements really are intended to articulate the range of activities and investments the plan will support. Really provide a level of specificity beyond the vision statement and the broader intentions of the plan. Proposed strategic elements are designed to reflect the goals and intentions of the MOU in 762. Want to jump into the governance, the coordination that we're looking at here. First, looking at the strategic leadership group. This is where Lisa's been very instrumental, along with Cal and many other folks in this group, and some great conversations had there. And really, that's the executive level decision-making body, and provides direction and vision for shared stewardship. And really the implementation, or the planning and the implementation of the strategy. It's comprised of federal and state agency leaders who have really committed to the MOU. Currently, that group consists of the Oregon Department of Forestry State Forester, the director of the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Oregon Water Enhancement Board director, U.S. Forest Service Region 6 Regional Forester, the Natural Resource Conservation Service State Conservationist, the state director of the Bureau of Land Management, and also the regional director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Next one down, I kind of want to look at a little bit deeper is the Agency Coordination Implementation Group, which is really responsible for the development and implementation of the 20-year strategy. And Renee's been in that group and absolutely instrumental in the success of that group as well. So really honored to be working with that group and helping shape that. And also, I think it's really important to look at engagements, proper engagement with the sovereign nations. We have lots of stakeholders in the state at the state level. And then also our 26 forest collaboratives and expanding that to all lands partnerships, to looking at our range ecosystems, et cetera. So working with those local groups is really key to the success in all this work that we're doing. So making sure that that engagement is properly functions is really important as well. So I just wanted to kind of provide that background. There's a lot of information there. Of course, I could provide a lot more, but I wanted to stay very high level in that. But what I do want to jump into is the development of the 20-year strategy through that governance framework, through that operating body, et cetera. And really starting with once we develop the framework, or how are we doing this, jumping into compiling information. That's really phase 2 of this. Right here is kind of a complex diagram of how we're looking at it, but this is a complex body of work. And what this is looking at work streams and how we're breaking this up. Really wanted to break it up because it is so large, and focus on the development of each components, and then weave that all together into the strategy. And those work streams that we've been really focusing on is compiling priorities and goals from existing plans. There's a lot of good information. There's a lot of good work out there. We want to build off of that. We don't want to quote unquote reinvent the wheel. So really looking at what's that information that's out there. How are we assessing our current capacity and readiness? There's a lot of talk of, do we have the capacity? Are we ready for this large scale body of work? And we need to assess that. Prioritize our restoration actions and geographies. How are we looking at prioritizing? How are we getting into what are the actions we really need to be focusing on, and where do we need to be doing this work? And then also the establishment of SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bounds. And then a financial implementation plan, and wrapping that up with establishing metrics and accountability. And once again, I said really wrapping that together. And the yellow line here, I think, is really important to note. And that's the adaptive management loop. We fully understand that we're not going to get it right at the beginning. We have to be adaptive. We have to work over the next 20 years. And really the idea of this is really a living document, and really constantly be working on this is extremely important with all the changes that we see socially and also environmentally. What I want to jump into is some of those work streams, once again, at a very high level. A lot of work going on here, but the first one is really understanding that capacity and readiness. Really with that is we want to identify where the conditions are in place for near-term implementation, and where those conditions are not in place and what those gaps are. Really with understanding that, we can understand what needs to be done and what are the necessary conditions for implementation. I think that's a really important part of this body of work. And also looking at how this is being completed through a combination of collecting spatial and tabular data. For example, where's our NEPA cleared acres? What kind of management plans do we have? How ready are we in that aspect? But also understanding the local and regional partnerships and collaboratives. Where are some of the gaps there that are doing this work, et cetera. So really diving into some of those components of what is capacity and readiness. I also want to jump into the geographic prioritization and the prioritization needs assessment. We need to understand what's needed out there in the landscape. So really starting with developing an approach, and that is, once again, building from existing data and decision support tools. Once again, a lot of good work is happening. We want to build from that and not start at the beginning. So really starting there. And then identifying need for ongoing process to update these priorities. A lot of talk about, once again, over 20 years, things are changing, and looking at how we can put together decision support that incorporates stakeholder feedback, periodically develop near-term and long-term priorities, right, as we're constantly changing. So understanding that longer term is really important, and really the benefit of a shared platform to track these changes, to build on initial data, and then also accomplishment tracking dashboard. There's been a lot of talk about how are we displaying this information, being very transparent. So deeper conversations are happening in that body of work. But jumping into the fun part of some maps, and once again, this is very initial work. This is kind of where we started, and there's a lot more that we're getting into. But really to look at that near-term prioritization, really taking direction from Senate Bill 762 and the Shared Stewardship MOU. It's what this is rooted in. So we wanted to start there. And that brought us to the 2018 Pacific Northwest Quantitative Wildfire Risk Assessments. And then also looking at our forest disturbance restoration needs outlined in some work that was done about expanding our understanding of the structural restoration needs in the Pacific Northwest. So really starting there. And what's really interesting as we look at that pre-existing data is looking at the wildfires that we saw in the previous slides and how they overlay. And once again, this is a starting point. There's a lot of work that's continuing to happen. This is not the final answer, but really how we started this process, looking into the future. And from there, taking that same data, I think it's important to note that that area represents half of the state. 37 million total acres. It's a lot of work. We're missing key components such as climate change, social and environmental justice, our mill and infrastructure, past accomplishments, and current priorities and planning that's happening. And also our collaborative capacity to increase the pace and scale. And those conversations are continuing on, right? So how we incorporate all that, I think, is really important, and taking feedback from the various groups to make sure that we're incorporating that adequately. Want to just dive into some of the restoration needs here. Like I had mentioned earlier, is looking at kind of the restoration and understanding the shift of forest structure to a more resilient natural range of variation. So really looking at some of this data. And I think it's also really important to note too, that working with the SageCon partnership and selecting which data sets to use to identify rangeland restoration need. And this is just one possible approach that's under consideration, but it's all about that collaboration and coordination and working with groups and the data we have out there. So just wanted to kind of show all that data, that it's looking at very scientifically driven, working with folks to kind of bring this together, and hopefully have some more maps here soon that kind of expand our knowledge and where we're going with this. Also wanted to hit on some other key components. One of them is looking at the important work of the investments that are guided by the strategy. Initial conversations identified a list of investments that we want to work towards landscape resilience. And then the most important thing, I think, is the bottom there, which is the desire to have coordinating actions and investments. And really our state and federal agencies, how are we coordinating our investments on the landscape to increase pace and scale, and really do some cross-boundary collaborative work. So wanted to throw out there. And once again, this is very much a starting point. We're continuing these conversations of our investments and also moving into our actions. And that's the next piece here, the initial actions that have been identified, right? Building capacity. We talk a lot about the need to build capacity and also proper engagement. We really need to be thinking about adequate engagement with the tribes, with stakeholders, communities engagement with the tribes, with stakeholders, communities to build well. Increased planning and implementation. We know that planning can be a barrier, and then the work on the ground, increasing that pace and scale of the implementation. Product utilization, utilizing the material, monitoring, a lot of discussions about monitoring. How are we monitoring this work over an extended period of time? And then also the development of decision support tools. We talked about that. And then new funding mechanisms. I think a real hope of this is to show that Oregon's a great place to invest. We have a lot of work to do, but also to bring in different funders and different work, and really thinking about how we align all of our funding in the right place at the right scale. So just once again, some high level priority actions that we're looking at and digging a little bit deeper into that as well. So I want to just look at, okay, great, right? We compiled a lot of information, we got a lot of inputs, but we still need to draft the plan. And that's where we are moving into right now. We're in this phase 3. And we've transitioned to that, and we're starting to put this strategy together. And what I wanted to look at here was that initial work stream of how that's moving into the drafting of the strategy. And really over the next 5 months is finalizing our collective priorities and developing our SMART goals. A lot of the information leads into those priority actions and geographies, our capacity and readiness needs, moving into our goals. And then also it's critical to understand how that looks at our financial implementation plan, how we look at that metrics and accountability. And once again, I just keep reiterating it. We know this is a starting point. We know that we have to look at adaptive management. We have to continue the engagement. We have to get input and continue to build this strategy over the next 20 years. So I hope I've expressed that's really an important piece here. Understanding that it's very difficult to quote unquote create the silver bullet in such a short amount of time. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about that overall adaptive management. So financial implementation plan, I'm going to hit on a few more points and we'll wrap it up for some Q&A. But really that financial implementation plan is looking at identifying existing funding sources and can be directed towards these actions and geographies. And then also exploring new funding sources and expanding our existing funding sources. We hope this strategy really lays that out and really brings in additional funding sources and expands what we currently have to really increase that pace and scale. And ultimately, we want to link that funding to strategic priorities, the capacity and readiness needs, the goals of the strategy, and really integrate it within those shared priorities over an extended period of time. So to kind of wrap us up, once again, I know that's a lot of information, but I also wanted to show what's our short-term timeline, right? Really looking at June to get a final report completed, and that's endorsed by the strategic leadership group. We've been working with that group from the beginning and continuing to work with that multi-agency group. I mean, you can see we're kind of in that drafting of the report, and then by March, we really want to present this key information, the key components in a PowerPoint to get some feedback. Moving into April, getting an initial draft of the report, and then into May, finalizing that, getting all the appropriate feedback, and then finalizing that report in June is the short-term timeline that we're looking at. So a lot of good folks working really hard to get us there. And the last thing I wanted to point out here going into our timeline, beginning conversations and developing this was implement the plan. A lot of good conversations of we don't want this to be another shelf document. We've heard that a lot, and that's been really ringing true in how we do this. And what I want to express is the idea here is to really move into implementation. Once we get that initial draft completed, go through adaptive management and keep driving this really important work in the state. So with that, I just want to say thank you for letting me present this really important work to y'all. And once again, expressing that I'm honored to present it. There's a lot of really good people who are working on it. And I'll open it up to questions and collaborative conversation, additional thoughts, etc. And we'll go from there. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Renee, Nathan, Cal. I'll open it up to questions and comments. Bruce.
Thanks, Liza Jane. I wholeheartedly support any effort that moves action out of the silo mentality. And this is fantastic. That said, it looks to, I watch this and I wonder, where's the Oregon Department of Agriculture? Where's the Oregon Global Warming Commission? These things, as far as resilience and the work that's been done by the Warming Commission, the grant programs that are out there, but through the Department of Ag, to stay. While I'd love to support it wholeheartedly, I'm going, it seems to me they're important players that are not involved to this point. And you use the word starting point several times, but you're talking about having a report done in July. It seems like it's fairly deep into the start gate. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Bruce. I think, and Nathan, jump in. I would say that with the focus initially on the agencies that had signed on to the shared stewardship MOU a few years ago, and then slight expansion to pull in OWEB, ODFW, BIA, I think more substantively, I would suspect that those concentric circles will continue to grow. And one piece I would highlight is how thoughtful the strategic leadership group, the ASIG, have been on the rangeland piece, and really leaning in on how do we leverage the information from SageCon. I think that opens a door to a whole host, for example, Oregon Department of Agriculture. So I think that there will be this kind of growing community of agencies involved to, as strategically as we can, tap into that range of investments that are happening out there and figure out where there are co-benefits that really are not only about wildfire risk reduction, but resilience too.
Okay.
Liza Jane, Ryan Gordon from ODF was able to join us, and it looks like maybe he has a response too.
Welcome, Ryan. Yeah, I was looking at you going, do we have a new board member? Who's this person? So welcome and love to hear from you.
No, thank you. And I apologize for being late. I got tied up at another appointment unexpectedly. Ryan Gordon, I serve as the planning branch director at the Oregon Department of Forestry. And I've been working with Nathan and the big team he's brought together on this body of work. And Renee, I really appreciate that response. And I just wanted to also address that while we do have a report due in June, that's really tied to the legislative mandate to develop this strategy that came through SB 762. And so, yes, we have to produce that and turn that in, but we really do see it as a starting point, as a solid foundation for a future body of work that will continue to grow. And just as Renee articulated, lots of room in there to continue to add partners and perspectives and programs over time. And we certainly know that those variables will change too. So I'll leave it there, but just wanted to throw that in. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Jamie and then Liz.
Yeah, just piggybacking on that, especially my friends who are still in Southern Oregon would be the first to say that wildfire is not just rangeland, it goes into communities as well. And so, yeah, I just, to your point, Renee, as that expands, I think starting with a core to kind of get some general purpose makes a lot of sense, but also incorporating other organizations, even I'm thinking DLCD, I'm sorry, I'm messing with my acronyms right now, but for land management and also some of the stuff that DHS is doing and the emergency response teams in Oregon. But it's such a great effort. It's such important work. So really appreciate that. And I guess if anything, my one question would be, as board members, how can we be more supportive of this effort?
I'm happy to take a crack at that, and Lisa, ODF partners, please chime in. So I would say that a great opportunity already has come up as Nathan was working with Institute for Natural Resources and a whole host of data providers to begin identifying what is that information we have and how can we leverage that and compile it. some new information had emerged in terms of dry type forest wildfire risk. And Eric Hartine and I communicated about when it is time for an update of the FIP ecological priorities, let's make sure that, you know, all of the work that is all of the time and effort being invested in gathering that technical information, let's leverage that. And then to the point that Nathan was making about decision support tools, making those available to local partners, whether they're approaching the FIP program or open solicitation applications, how can they really tap into that information that is available to help with some of their prioritization, recognizing that they may have capacity constraints. Again, going to what Nathan was pointing out, we may need to help lift some groups organizationally in terms of planning resources. So I think just being mindful of where our programs can intersect in a really helpful way. But yes, Lisa, Cal, Ryan, Nathan, other thoughts?
I think Renee hit it on the head. It's like, as we think about some of our grant programs and working with partners in some of these different types, making sure that we're bringing it together for them. They're not going to know at the local level that we have many of these initiatives going on at the state and federal level. And so trying to help bring the resources to them in the most accessible way possible, I think is incredibly important. The other thing I think we can continue to do, and I failed to mention this in the beginning, OWEB was very helpful as we did outreach to the tribal community, and Ken Fetcho provided tremendous help because time and place, ODF didn't have a tribal liaison yet. And so we've done a lot of work in terms of helping think about the principles that the board has had for priorities as we've communicated with this group in terms of thinking about the tribal communities, communicating with them early and often, and being sure that we're listening and also thinking about how it affects diverse populations across the state and communicating why we prioritize what we prioritize. Because I was in one of the first meetings, we started talking about prioritizing places. And I was like, ooh, I can think of some people that got hit by fire in 2020 that aren't going to appreciate that very much. And so being sure as a community that we are clearly articulating why we're choosing the priorities we're choosing now, and more will come later. So it's clear and consistent communication across all the agencies.
Thank you, Lisa. I'd like to open to Cal to make comment there. And you got to unmute.
I got on mute. Sorry about that. I just wanted to make a comment on what we're talking, the question about inclusiveness. And of course, this whole project was built around inclusiveness. And I think it is a right comment to say, where's ODA? Where's the Oregon Warming Commission and so on? But we allowed so many people under the tent to get this thing moving. And I think that was probably more of an expediency decision. But when I almost took my hand down because Lisa talked about the tribes. And that was another discussion. Do we invite all 9 tribes into this planning phase? And we decided to bring Bodie Shaw from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I've known Bodie for decades. And to just give some tribal aspects and inputs, plus the input that Director Hansen brought through OWEB's contacts were just invaluable. But I think the long lasting, to this whole project is our governance. And I know it gets kind of downplayed. It's just like another thing on the list, but the governance that we're discussing, how we do business, is really important. How do we discuss these things around all these agencies and all these inputs? And inclusiveness is a big part of that. And I think we're going to have to open the tent and let more people underneath as they need. Some people may come in. I know tribes will probably want to come in and come out when there are issues that affect them. I've worked with tribes for decades also, but because they don't have enough personnel to staff something like, I know that's why I appreciate it when we have people from Forest Service and all the various agencies that come every month and meet with us, because I'll tell you, we're on these Zoom meetings and in-person meetings now, and it's just not enough resources. Tribes are even more strapped because they don't have the depth of resources in their individuals. So we have to adjust and allow participation at various levels. And I think that through the governance piece that Nathan's putting together, I think we'll be able to address those types of needs going forward. So thank you for allowing me to just say a few words on that.
Sure, thank you. Liz and then Mark.
Thanks for the presentation. I had the privilege of listening to it 2 weeks ago, so I had a minute or two to think about it. And to me, those first maps, Nathan, were just so striking on the history of wildfire, historic wildfire across the state, and really caught my attention. So I just wanted to reiterate Bruce's concern about some of the climate information and how that gets in. And I know that you've weaved in some of it and plan to weave in more, Nathan, from our presentation that you gave to us. So looking forward to that. And then Nathan, you know, as a board, we'll have the opportunity to do some explaining on this, you know, very ambitious and a lot of information kind of report. And I'm thinking about the two maps that you had, the one that showed the 58% of wildfire, and the one right before that, that helped prioritize. If you could kind of maybe tell us what went into that inaugural prioritization, that would help us, because I do think it's going to, you know, every, you know, community of interest that looks at this will kind of want to know, how did you get there? And if we could have, you know, an elevator, you know, little speech about that and where you're going with it, that would be great, because the visual piece is so striking.
Yeah, that's great. I really appreciate that feedback. And I will say a lot of the conversations with the short-term maps and the longer-term decision support, really making that clear, transparent, open, providing that information of how we got where we did, and then incorporating changes. I keep saying that. So that's some really good feedback. And I think that's some lessons we've learned in the past and moving to the future of just really being very transparent. I think that's the idea of this shared stewardship, as well as having some reasons and some information and some scientific support of how we made the decisions, even though I think we all understand can be very difficult sometimes. So that's some really good feedback. I really appreciate that. And once again, I'm going to take all this back to the groups, and we'll keep talking to keep driving. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Liza Jane. Cal, good to see you. Congratulations on your job. I haven't had a chance to shake your hand yet, but congratulations on your new position. So initial reaction is very impressive. The question I have, and Nathan, you addressed it just a little bit. You know, the iron's hot right now. It's a good time to strike. Everybody's, I can't believe that there isn't a lot of support for this effort that's out there with this initiative. But I'm worried, how do we keep this thing from being put on the shelf on July when it's officially moved forward? You mentioned that is really important, that we don't put this on the shelf and that we stay engaged. Is there some specific talk among the initiative participants so far about, okay, now if we're so tied to this and we support it so much, what specifics do we do to keep this initiative going so that it doesn't just fall on its own weight and go away? Have you given that thought? And do you have any specifics that you could add so that this doesn't end up something on the shelf and yeah, it was a good idea, but now we're not there. We got to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll hit on a couple points, and of course, like to hear feedback as well. A couple is, you know, this is very high state level, and how do we start integrating that at a local level and think of some kind of strategy and planning efforts at a very local level is one conversation that's being had, to really look at where do we place treatments, how do we collectively place those treatments, what are the capacity gaps and needs, the priorities, some of that work. I think also too, I know there's a diverse group here. Looking at the Oregon conservation strategy of where's the habitat needs, looking at the fire sheds, with the U.S. Forest Service, looking at BLM's priorities. How do we start integrating those priorities together and really building off a lot of the great work. So there's those conversations, and then that's a good question, right? And that's what we're continuing to drive is we say, let's just not make it a shelf document, but how do we keep driving that? And some other thoughts is that governance that was mentioned, continuing to meet, continuing to have conversations, continuing to identify where are the barriers, continuing to work on how to overcome those barriers. And that's where I hope would be through this process as well, is as we identify those challenges and barriers, bringing them to the boards, bringing them to the different groups to figure out how we can overcome some of those. So just some original, some very like high level thoughts, but I'd also be curious to hear others as well. And hopefully that helps out a little bit.
Thank you. Dan.
All right, thanks, Liza Jane. Hey, thanks, Nathan and Cal. Dan Shively, for the record, U.S. Forest Service non-voting member to the OWEB board. And not really a question, maybe I'll build a little. First off, just a comment and accolade. I just want to say thanks, Cal and Nathan, for your leadership, the work in building the strategy and involving some of our key staff, Brian Spradlin, Linda Lynn. I was just talking with Brian in my office earlier today about this body of work developing, Nathan, and was looking forward to this presentation. So just want to express the thanks and gratitude and point out, Mark, maybe to your question or your comment, we will not and cannot afford to let this plan gather dust on the shelf. You know, as I talked about yesterday in my opening remarks, the imperative around the USDA Forest Service's work in addressing the national wildfire crisis, it's not just the Forest Service, it covers all land types, all land ownerships. And that really is, you know, the bigger lens, I think, in which these statewide plans are being developed. And then as Nathan, you've just pointed out, getting more tactical. What does it mean on the ground? What does it mean in Central Oregon? It's one of the original 10 national priority landscapes. What will it mean now down in, you know, on the eastern flanks of the Mount Hood in northwestern Oregon? What will it look like in southern Oregon around the Fremont, Wainema, contributing to the larger Klamath Basin? But rest assured, we're doing a lot of work in this matrix land, all in between these focal areas, huge amounts of work. I want to point out that we're already beginning and thinking about building out with Kyle Sullivan there at ODF and Cal staff, the federal forest program, to just gather more shared stewardship opportunity through the Good Neighbor Authority. Oregon used to be, and it may still be, the only state nationwide that has a Good Neighbor Authority MOU at the state level in the governor's office, allowing the Forest Service to work one-on-one directly with any state agency. We're beginning to look at opportunities and partnering with ODOT. We've been working with ODF and ODFW. So that tool is in place to continue to best harness the incoming federal funds, partnering with state funds through appropriations that Nathan mentioned and Cal, and really, you know, find those spots on the landscape where we can leverage our resources and assets the very best we can and move forward with important work. If anyone sees or feels like we're letting a plan lay on the shelf, please shout out. It's in our imperative collective best interest in the state of Oregon that we're not letting that happen. Thank you, Liza Jane.
Thank you, Dan. Cal. Mute off.
Mute off, mute off. Yeah, I was just going to comment on Dan. I talked to Glenn Casamassa at least once a month, and I think up to 3 or 4 times a month. And I'll tell you, he is committed as the regional forester. And in fact, I think, Dan, we might be talking next month as a result of some of we had discussed that, you know, we're going to have this plan, and I haven't talked to Nathan yet. So Nathan, this is really all news to you, that as we develop we're having this governance and how do we work together? It's going to take a while to get that thing going. And so we do want to talk about how the Forest Service looks at priorities, how they set them, and we'll start getting that discussion so we can weave that into the plan and how we bring that forward to the other agencies. But overall, I just see a strong commitment by the agencies. NRCS, Corey, you are, I forgot, I just saw you. And I know I see your face on all those Zoom meetings, and I appreciate your participation there. And I think I saw NRCS in here, and NRCS has been a really big supporter. And I don't see BLM, but don't discount them out. I talk to Barry Bashu on a regular basis. Oh, there you are, Aaron. So, this is, there is a strong commitment. People are seeing that landscape resiliency. We can put fires out, but unless we work on the landscapes, and especially around those communities at risk, I think we need to have the whole program, and I see a commitment there. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Cal.
Oh,
Ryan,
wait a minute. Hi, Mark.
Yeah.
Hi, Liz.
Ryan, did you have your hand up and then chose different? Did I miss you?
I was just going to offer a couple of really quick thoughts, if I may, to the question about how we keep this going and alive. And I was just going to sort of go out on a bit of a limb and offer that I'm actually looking forward to moving past the June, July timeframe when we have to turn something into the legislature, frankly, to really kind of free us up from that commitment and some of the politics associated with that. And really then just start to develop this thing, purely organically with the groups that are engaged. And I also anticipate that that report that we'll put together will include a number of policy recommendations, because there's a lot of great stuff that's come out of this meeting and many others that we simply don't have the time and resources to chase after right now, but they'll be really valuable over the long run. And I think that's kind of the feedstock or the fuel that'll keep this thing going. So thanks for the time to say that.
Thank you. Lisa.
Thanks. So just one other shout out. I failed to mention Corey was instrumental in developing a message and a presentation to the Legislative Commission on Indian Services during one of their meetings a couple months ago, to take the shared stewardship approach to them and do an introduction. And she just did an amazing job. So if you're seeing, I think there are all kinds of pieces of OWEB and the board linking into this initiative from all different directions and trying to take the principles that we're using here and transferring them forward.
Okay, thank you. I have a comment, and sometimes, since as co-chair, I try and wait till the end, and then my comment seems kind of out of place. And I want to be gentle, but I served, I'll tell a little story, served on the Columbia Basin Task Force for Salmon Recovery. And we had the same fear, at least I did, that we would create, we worked 4 years and we created some beautiful manuals. And I was like, what is it? Salmon don't read, man. This is beautiful. And they're still meeting. There's still smaller committees and they're still talking about it. And there's strength in that. But I think, Lisa, I just heard you say about local communities that they won't know all the things. Well, I want to challenge us and say we don't either. And I'm seeing the more I know, the less I know. And what I'm open to is looking at the incredible amount of work all over Oregon going on for shared stewardship, for for fish, for wildlife, for our landscapes. We just heard from the Rogue area what they're doing to reduce wildfire. I feel like I don't know who's going to do it or who should or who might want to. I think the governor's office might have somebody that could just take all this work, take it all, because if you don't know what's going on that your neighbors are doing, you may repeat it. You may not build on it. And I said that at the salmon work too. Like, they've been working on salmon for over 100 years. And everywhere I turned, somebody was doing something for salmon, and we're still not successful. So I really think to come together and say the word shared, we better learn first what's happening on every corner at every level on towards our goals. And then we can figure out how we strengthen that by working together. So I'm all behind this. I think it's great. I hope that somebody will do that so that all of, many hands make light work. And I think we need to find out what all the hands are doing. So I'm anxious to hear how this goes. I'm anxious, Ryan, for you to get this off the shelf and keep it rolling. I would encourage you to have people participate that are not with an agency or a nonprofit. I think that's a valuable voice in the agency, academia, environment that adds great diversity to the way you move forward. So thank you. Well, I just let her loose. Does anybody else have any other comments or questions? Well, thank you so much for this work, for sharing it with us today, and we'll keep looking forward to hearing about it as you go.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you.
Barbara, are you?
Yep,
Yeah.
I'm here. All right, moving on down to agenda item O. Unless, do we want to talk? Well, we'll do that in other business. But let's move on down to the spending plan. I'd like to call Lisa and Eric Williams forward, please.
Okay, thank you, Co-Chair Boyer, members of the board. Eric Williams, Grant Program Manager, here along with our Director, Lisa Sharpelow-Hansen. This is an agenda item that we do at the same time of year in odd numbered years. And this one is to tee up the spending plan conversation. This is a big job for the board, and that's why we take 3 meetings to get there to actual adoption of the spending plan. This agenda item is for the purpose of teeing it up at a very high level, looking at categories of spending plan line items. We'll proceed into April board meeting to talk specifically about each line item in the spending plan to give you full background on all of those line items individually. And then in July, we'll be asking you to adopt a spending plan for the 2023-2025 biennium. The staff report for this item is on page 201 of the ebook. And it gives a little bit of this background that I've just summarized. And also has some very preliminary numbers that we can talk a little bit about today. In terms of what the discussion today is centering on are the funds that the board has the discretion to allocate through primarily lottery funding and then significantly with Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery funding and also a small amount of salmon plate revenues. We're not talking today about some of the legislatively directed funding programs like we've had in the last couple of years for wildfire and drought recovery, starting up funding for the Agricultural Heritage Program. The board doesn't have discretion over that other than what the legislature asks us to do with those. So for today, we're not talking about those, but by July, those will be fully incorporated into the spending plan. Another note as background here is that while we have numbers in the spending plan staff report, and they may look somewhat precise because they have decimal places in them, these are really kind of a vague starting point based on information that we have at hand right now, which is going to change. And a key piece of that information is the revenue forecast that the state economist puts out each quarter. We had one in December, and that forecast includes anticipated lottery revenues. And so that's what we've used for now to start thinking about what our total spending plan budget is going to be, as well as what Courtney Schaff has been hearing from NOAA about anticipated amounts in the Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Fund. We will get additional revenue forecasts in February and in May. That May forecast is going to be the one that the budget is based on and the one that we will finally use. And then another note as background in terms of what went into these preliminary numbers here. is that we also typically the board has held back a little bit and not programs money into the spending plan right off the bat. Think of it as sort of a contingency if things go south like they did during the pandemic. We fully utilized every penny that was held back during that time. And so the numbers that you see here don't include all of the funds that we expect to have available. There's about 7 million or so that are held in reserve and not put onto this table that you see in the staff report. So about the categories themselves, these are organized along the lines of what you see each board meeting in the spending plan document. And for this ebook, that document is on page 8, the current spending plan. And the core programs capture open solicitation, focused investments, operating capacity, and then we have an other category, which includes things like our CREP payment, governor's priorities, a couple of other governor-directed initiatives like SageCon and the Columbia Estuary Partnership. Those things are all lumped into the other category. And another note about how we started framing this discussion is just recognizing that there are some fixed costs, probably isn't the correct term because you do have the authority to move things around. But when we commit to FIP funding, for example, we're making that long-term 6-year commitment. And so there's an expectation that those funds are going to be there in successive biennia. So a big chunk of the focused investment category is more or less a fixed cost based on the cohort 2 and cohort 3 FIPs that have already been awarded. And this number includes what they have requested for biennium 3 for cohort 2 and biennium 2 for cohort 3. And it is different than in prior bienniums because this is the first time where we have 2 full cohorts of FIPs that are incorporating out-year biennium plus money for another solicitation of FIPs. In the past, we only had 1 cohort that was continuing plus new ones coming in. And so that is one of the reasons that you see a jump in the focused investment number there. That number is only incorporating $8 million for new FIPs, which is where we started out last biennium, but the board then increased that along the way. Operating capacity, we have past practice of including kind of regular cost of living or inflationary adjustments. And so a big chunk of the funds that you see in the operating capacity are more or less fixed based on that. And another item to note in the other category, the board spent a lot of time discussing what I look at as a generational opportunity for large-scale restoration in the Klamath Basin. And the board has committed funding to restoration behind the dam removal projects going on down there. And as we talked in the past, it's a commitment of $15 million. And so a chunk of that is incorporated into the other category here this time. And you can see how that has impacted the total there. And when you have more or less fixed costs in the other categories, it means there aren't a lot of other places to push pull and make the numbers work out. And so you see in there a resulting, looks like a decrease in open solicitation because it is a decrease from what's currently in there in the spending plan. However, it's basically back to where the spending plan started out at the beginning of the 21-23 biennium, prior to adjustments being made by the board at the midpoint of the biennium, which we typically do, and also adjustments made after the October board meeting when funds were added for the Klamath Restoration Initiative. So all of that is captured in the table. Again, these numbers look precise, but they're not. They're meant as a starting point so that we can talk about your desires to see how this should play out by the time we get to July. This is an informational item. We're not asking you to make any decisions today, but we want to hear from you if you have thoughts about the spending plan categories, and then also If you look at the spending plan on page 8, any questions or things you would like to see when we come back to talk to you in April about those spending plan line items. Again, remembering we are going to present to you information on every single line item. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time on the spending plan at the April board meeting. So let me stop there, see if Lisa has anything she'd like to add.
Thanks for that explanation, Eric. You did a great job. I think the one thing that I would just provide some clarity to, as I understand it in the past, and Stephen talked about this yesterday, at this board meeting, typically you would have looked at percentages. How are you going to split the percentage? How much is going to go in open solicitation percentage-wise? How much is going to go in focused investment percentage-wise? Operating capacity and other, same thing. The challenge that we had when we started to work through that was other changed significantly when we made the 15 million commitment to the Klamath post dam restoration work. And so it immediately skewed those percentages. And it was important, at least from my perspective, as we built it, that we put that commitment in and had it built in from the beginning and then worked backwards. I think the other thing that I would mention when we were working through this operating capacity, the board added money to operating capacity in July. We've heard over the last several meetings from local organizations the need for operating capacity. And so instead of rolling that back to the beginning of the biennium number, we chose to roll that number forward for what we spent it up to. And then, as Eric explained, the fixed costs and FIPS, we added 2. We had new cash for 2, so there's a little bit of room there depending on how many the board might want to fund, and then kept a pretty significant holdback, just not knowing what was going to come. And since it's a little ways away before we get a really good forecast in May, but would like, some more thoughts. I think you all heard several times during this meeting from some of our partners advocating for additional money in open solicitation. I anticipated that to happen because of the way we built this proposal to bring to you, but felt like there was solid logic behind it to be able to talk through the numbers in a reasonable way.
All right, thank you, Lisa. Any questions or comments on our informational item? Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks. And just for clarity, so again, these aren't solid numbers, they're estimates, and it sounds like things will kind of roll out between now and May. At the April board meeting, we'll see numbers again, have a chance to kind of discuss with going forward with a board vote in July. Is that sound right? Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
Meg.
Thank you. I'm trying to frame what I want to know. I'm having a hard time framing it. So the open solicitation for now, the decision to go back to the beginning of the biennium as for the proposed next biennial amount and not carry forward increases that happened during the biennium. Is that what the board has done in the past, or is that a departure from what we would normally have done?
So Eric can answer the past history. We needed to balance to a number though that we thought we had looking based on the last forecast.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were trying to balance and basically have a very conservative proposal going into this discussion, because it's always easier to add to things than it is to put it in and pull it back. Right. And that's really the approach that I wanted to take with it.
It is different than in the past, right, Meg, because in the previous 3, I think, bienniums, when we've had forecasts at this stage of the game, lottery revenue forecasts were quite healthy. And so we were seeing increases that were well outpacing the rate of inflation. And so we had a lot more flexibility in prior biennia. And as was mentioned earlier today, the revenue forecast is looking at, potentially a mild recession. So that is quite a bit different than the last 3 times we've had this conversation.
Sorry. That puppy I mentioned yesterday broke into the room. So there's the forecast being part of the issue and trying to be conservative on this too. And then I think I understand the FIP issue is that there are more of them. And essentially, I think what you're saying is these are committed funds, practically speaking. In the
Yes,
FIP,
that's
right?
correct. And
Okay.
the reason you see a fairly significant increase in the number is that last time that we were doing this, we only had 1 full cohort of FIPS that we had already committed to in the past. We had a little bit of makeup money from the cohort 1 FIPS that had their numbers reduced during the COVID shutdown. But we only had to add like $3.8 million into the last time we had this conversation, whereas now we have a full cohort of $16 million and a little bit less for the other cohort. So it's the first time we've had 2 full cohorts of prior commitments to build into the spending plan, plus adding money, like I mentioned earlier, the $8 million for new solicitation for cohort 4.
Okay. And next to the last thing, on the operating capacity, that is kind of an inflationary increase that we're seeing, a proposed inflationary increase that we're seeing there. Is that right? Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, the increase that you're seeing there is the number that the board added up into the spending plan back in July.
Okay.
And it was just trying to hold them flat and thinking that would be a difficult spot given all the discussions that had happened around the need for local capacity at previous board meetings.
And I see that Courtney has joined and unmuted herself, so she might have something to add.
And I would just also point the board to, as Erica said, page 8, the more detailed spending plan. So that operating capacity category includes watershed councils and soil and water conservation districts, operating capacity funds, the partnership technical assistance grants, the statewide grant to the Oregon Conservation Partnership, and the organizational collaboration grants. So there is a pot of grant types that all fall within that category.
Okay. Last question from me is how much of the 14.9 is the Klamath funds in that last column?
10.9.
11 million.
Yeah, it's 11. It's almost 11 million. It's 10.947 is what we have to fit.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. Bruce, you got your hand up.
Thanks. I've got a couple things, but first off, let's talk about the Klamath. We're showing that we had committed $4 million currently. I mean, it's committed. And then we've got the remainder of the 11 in this future spending plan, in the spending plan. I was unaware that we had actually spent the $4 million. Is it an accrual type? I know we don't use that word, but is that money accrued and there, or is it going to be, if it's still there today in 23, is it going to spill over and that number of 14.9 going to 14.9 going to become 18.9 because we're going to add the 4?
No. So I think about it this way. We've set it aside and it's in a holding account.
Okay.
Sitting there. And so this is just the remainder to bump it up to the total of 15.
Okay. So it is spent and it's not going to.
Well, it's held aside.
It's accrued. Okay. Yeah. So I've gone over these numbers over the last few days since I received them. And I mentioned yesterday that I had some heartburn, and I still do. Why percentages I agree, went out of whack because of Klamath. Ratios of the remaining three core items, open solicitation, FIP, operating capacity, those didn't change. It's almost to the dollar. For every dollar we spend in operating capacity, spend $2 in FIP, spend $3 in open solicitation. Board member Brandt brought up yesterday, remembered the ratio, it was a percentage at the time, 25%. And it looks to me like we're not sharing the pain in budgeting and the spending plan equitably across these areas. I understand that they're all important. The 19.7 for operating capacity, it contains a lot of things, but 17 million of that 19 or 19.8 is in capacity. Focused investments, they've moved up. I'm just, if I had a sense that every available dollar that shows up as we get a better handle on income, if I had a sense that all of that money was going to be going into open solicitation, I might have less of a heartburn. But that dollars on the ground component that is so important in open solicitation, I don't feel that we should put all of the burden in our spending plan from Klamath, cost of living, and remove it from our proposed spending plan in open solicitation. So I think this is the month, if I remember right, this is the meeting where we get to kind of say where we would like to see it go. So that's where I would like to see it go. I'd like to see the pain spread out. Those numbers in focused investment dropped a little to where we can. I would like to see operating capacity go back to the original, keep as much as we can, and look, at least give us some sort of an idea of what we might anticipate on increased revenues, so that we have a sense of where open solicitation might end up. So I'd love to hear what other board members feel about this. Thanks.
Just one comment, Bruce. I don't want to answer that question or provide fodder until other board members comment. But regarding one item, though, the 11 million for Klamath is restoration money, so it is akin to the kind of work we do in open solicitation.
I agree, and that was, I did have that thought as well, Eric, and I thought, if that's the way we want to look at it, maybe we should just put it in as an open solicitation subcategory for the short term. I don't know, but what I worry about is a trend of moving the ratio of money, open solicitation money, into other areas, whether it be capacity, whether it be focused investment, without maintaining the important, what I believe is the core element. So if the board wanted to put that in open solicitation for the period, and say that it's extraordinary circumstances, I think I could feel better about it, because it wouldn't create a precedent for changing the ratio. So thanks.
Thank you. All right, Mark, you got your hand up, please.
I'm okay with what Bruce just proposed, but I have another thought here. I don't lose too much sleep over this. And the reason that I don't is we've still got 2 revenue forecasts. This is January. We've got a 2 more forecasts before the budget is finalized in, the end of June when the legislature says they put the T's and cross everything and give us our money. And then at that point in time, we can come back. I think we've had this discussion before with 2 years ago and we did the same thing. So I tend to be an optimist. I hope that the revenues will go up with lottery and those kind of things, but it could also go the other direction. You hear about this mild recession, but we've got 2 more revenue forecasts. And because we receive a significant amount of our money from that revenue forecast, lottery and other sources and income tax, the general fund that we're now getting, I personally don't lose too much sleep over right now what we're talking about tweaking back and forth. I think as we get closer, we can tweak the budget more if we say, oh geez, the revenue's really gone up, or maybe there'll be more Powerball and Mega Millions out there that really people want to go buy some more lottery tickets. So that's kind of where I come from on it.
Thank you, Mark. All right, Stephen.
Yeah, just a little follow up on Bruce and Mark's points. And I do recall when we had this discussion when FIPS originated that it was a fairly healthy debate about making sure that they were contained in some sort of proportion. I recall 25%, but Eric, I don't know if there was a decision or if there was just a guidance that's sort of the target where we want to go. And so maybe that'd be useful to resurrect where we are officially on that. And then secondly, as I see the new numbers, and I agree, they're just the beginning shots and so forth, it has crept up to, depending on how you do the math, up to 29 or 33%, 29%, according to my simple math, if you include the Klamath in there as grants. So it is creeping up into that 1/3 range. And so maybe the next presentation, we can again look at those percentages and maybe have a discussion as far as what's the strategy that OWEB wants to go in this direction.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Your memory is quite good. Going back to when we had those initial discussions, when the board had those initial discussions about the proportion of funding going into FIP, because at the time there was quite a concern about what impact it would have, particularly on open solicitation funding. And as I alluded to earlier, I think what really helped us out quite a bit was very healthy lottery revenues, which increased enough over time once the FIP program started that open solicitation never really decreased. And we were able to, and eventually, kept adding more to it instead of having it go down. But the board did initially express, and it wasn't a formal adoption of a policy, but the board initially expressed comfort with the initial rollout of the FIP getting to 25% by the second cohort of FIPS. They started to talk about what about beyond that, and I think that's where there wasn't entirely consensus on the board. Some members were comfortable with 30. Others said, well, let's wait till see when we get there to really figure that out. There was some conversation about potentially reaching 30% because there was an awareness that as you keep getting new FIPS into the program and you're making those 3 biennium commitments, you're going to see an increasing number. And this is where we are right now. We're at that point where the board knew we would be hitting something like 30%, and they started to talk about it. But I think at the time, it seemed far enough in the future. They didn't settle on, okay, 30 is the right number, 28 is the right number, 32. They didn't come up with that, but really talked about it more conceptually.
Lisa or Eliza Jane?
I'll pass to Lisa and come on back for me.
Okay, thank you.
It's just a question to the board. So when the board committed the 15 million to Klamath, we talked about it being FIP-like because it's over a period of time. It's not truly a FIP because it doesn't have all of the elements, but the funding is similar to. And so I have had concern in terms of these long-term commitments and what it does. And so thinking about if the board wants us to move the Klamath up, that's fine. We know what it is. Do we move it up into open solicitation? Do you think about it in the FIP section, even though it's a little bit different because it's a long-term commitment to help, bring things back in line? If that's the case, would you only want to consider funding one FIP in the next biennium because we have, that hefty commitment with Klamath?
Mhm. All right, I think Liza Jane might have an answer for that. No? Okay.
No, Liza Jane doesn't.
Okay.
But I have a comment, I might as well roll. So this was not in our test the other day, I'm pretty sure. Although I'm feeling like I'm ignorant. Let me ask the question, Eric. If you're in a FIP area, a FIP served landscape, you can, a partnership or a group that's involved in that, they can apply for a operating grant or a open solicitation grant or a different grant stream through OWEB. Is that correct?
Thanks, Liza Jane. If there's an active FIP, what that means is that we cannot fund through open solicitation any project proposal, project application that proposes to implement the FIP actions within the defined geography of the FIP. So, for example, if you've got a FIP that involves a particular stream watershed and the focus of the FIP is on opening up barriers to fish passage, and that's the only focus in that geography of the FIP, you could come into open solicitation to do some other in-stream habitat or riparian habitat project because that action's not part of the FIP, even though you're in the same geography. But you could not come in for a fish passage project in open solicitation because that is what the FIP is trying to accomplish. And so that rule is designed to essentially prevent that kind of, accessing both funding streams for the same work.
Okay, so that's good to know. Thank you. I don't feel as ignorant because that's really sticky. It's clear,
yes.
It's clear, but it also helps me support Bruce. And I have to say that, support Bruce in his position and concerns there wholeheartedly. And I wanted to share that. So.
All right, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. I do have some thoughts on what Bruce and Liza Jane and Lisa have talked about. And I don't know what the right answer is, but I would just caution us that putting it up in open solicitation, it wasn't necessarily open solicitation where they came to us. It was a special meeting time on the agenda in the October meeting. It was a special opportunity and a project. That said, it's my understanding that we've allocated, the 15 million that they requested broken up into different bienniums. But they will still have to come back to us with a grant application or a project application. So then it could qualify as open solicitation. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't have a recommendation. I'm just saying I've been thinking about a potential watch out situation of calling it open solicitation, and they really didn't compete necessarily. They have money set aside that we've already allocated.
I think you're right on, Lindsay. It really is directed spending. It is not put out there for others to compete for. So I think your distinction is correct.
Thank you. Bruce.
That was great, Lindsay. And I don't know what hurts most, Liza Jane's words or Jamie's laughing. They're both pretty hurtful. So, Lisa, I don't know the right answer. I like the way the options you're looking at. If we were to consider, since we're considering managing Klamath like a FIP on the grant cycles, do we anticipate all 11 million going out in the next biennium? If we do, then it should stay there. If we expect it to go out over past this next planning biennium, maybe we should reflect that in our changing, like we would a FIP, and just put the portion that we expect to go out in the biennium. It would exacerbate the, if we put it in, happen to put it in the FIP, it would exacerbate the ratio, what I see as an imbalance, or certainly a different balance than we've looked at in the past. But we know it's a one-off. And we could, I think there's a way to justify a clearly understood one-off spending plan explanation to the various partners, those who want strong FIP spending, those who want strong operating spending, those who want strong and maintaining our commitment to open solicitation. So I'm curious, I think it's something that staff needs to take a look at. We're not going to solve here, but wherever it should go, I think it should reflect the actual spending expectations, time expectations of the 11 million. And if we can push it into the following biennium, I would love to see some of that. Maybe we can't, but other than that, I just think it's all these things that we expected to happen, and the board back then, as Eric says, saw it coming. Well, it's here and they're gone. So we get to deal with it.
Thank you, Bruce. Jamie.
I have a question. First of all, some language in the report, and I apologize, Eric, if you said this and I missed it, but under that table on table 1, and that column says other, it says including the Klamath River post dam removal. When you say including, is there anything else, or are we just talking about Klamath for that spending item?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. It is not just Klamath. And if you go up to the spending plan on page 8 of your ebook, you'll see the other items, and they include CREP payments, governor's priorities, strategic implementation area grants, Lower Columbia Estuary Partnership, and the SageCon partnership.
Okay, thank you. And then, because I will say, I was thinking of Klamath more as a FIP or maybe a pre-FIP to Lindsay's comments, but back to the question about the geography and overlap. If Klamath theoretically is put into a FIPS column, if that's what's part of what's being considered, could the geography be very narrowly defined? I mean, yes, it's fish passage, but the dams themselves are pretty limited. So that wouldn't necessarily exclude, I think it was Liza Jane who raised, or someone raised a concern about it potentially excluding other projects in the Klamath area. It seems like we could.
I think we got off track a little bit by thinking of Klamath as a FIP. It really is not. I think what Lisa said is the dollar amount is similar to a FIP. But in terms of the way it works, it is not a FIP. It's not, we're not turning it over to a partnership to vet projects and bring them to us. In that sense, it operates more like open solicitation, where we're going to get an application, we're going to review it and decide whether to fund it. But so I think I would dissuade the board from thinking of it as a FIP, because it really isn't. And so the FIP rule about overlap would not apply to the Klamath.
Okay, thank you for that. And then going back to the table, it's the challenge of presenting data and information, but you've got that other column. I'm wondering if it does end up falling under something else, or we think of it in something else in terms of that grouping that Bruce was thinking of. We may still want to separate that out, because governor's priorities and some of these other things that are driven, the Klamath Dam project does seem to be a very unique entity that I would not anticipate coming up again, unless we've got a kind of conceptual category of interstate boundary projects, although then there was a comment yesterday about we don't give money outside the state. But yeah, we might want to just separate those out, because I think some of the governor's priorities would get lost under that number, but they are then different, I think, in how we think about those buckets.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Just one follow-up on that. I think we put it there because it seems most similar to the governor's priorities line item, because this was a commitment the state made as a state enterprise, and it just happened that, you know, OWEB is the funding vehicle. So it really kind of started out as a governor's priority, but it's obviously much bigger and not the typical kind of project that we do through the governor's priority line item.
Thank you for that. That makes a lot of sense. But to that point, did it come to us as a true ask, or as one expression of a voluntold? Were we voluntold to do it, or which I think of more as the governor's priorities, or is this something that was truly a consideration by the board?
It seems.
Or do I want to withdraw the question?
Maybe
I withdraw the question. Never mind.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this topic? All right, thank you. Liza Jane, do you want to go down to PE and start with maybe rewording? Meg has to leave here in about 7 minutes, and I know one agenda item she'd probably be interested in that we just going to touch upon.
Yes, agenda item P is our other business. We have a few things tucked into here. We're going to revisit our in-person, the agenda item M. But first, Lisa, you want to grab this suggestion and roll?
Sure, I can do that for you.
Thank you.
So just before we came back at noon, there were a couple comments about one of the sections where we used the word complete around applications and how we accepted them. We did a little bit of noodling and wondered if putting the word final there in that section would be better to separate it as something other than complete. If that is the desire of the board, we need to either rescind the other motion to make a new motion, or amend the previous motion to delete the word complete, insert the word final in the rules that the board would be adopting. Was that clear as mud?
No, that's clear. Jamie, do you have a comment?
I think this is really important. I think that was an oversight, and I think Meg was spot on that. So if she wants to make the motion, I'll second it.
Okay.
And whatever the process is, Lisa, just lay out. Yeah, I think this is going to save a lot of headaches.
And I think we could just amend the motion.
Yeah, whose motion was that? So whoever, does that have to be amended by the person that made it? I don't know the rules.
Jamie, is your hand still up, or? Okay. Is April, are you keeping track of us? Does anybody, do you?
I made the motion.
There we go.
Barbara made the motion, but I cannot remember who seconded. It might have been Liz. Liz, did you?
Do you both have to be involved in this, or can you just make the recommendation and to
amend my motion to read? Hold on, I'll tell you in a second.
I bet you we have to rescind it first and then make a new one. I'm thinking.
No, I'm just going to amend it. I'm going to amend my motion to read, I move the board approve OWEB grant program administration rules found in attachment D as revised at this meeting, replacing the word complete with the word final in ORA 695-005-0040 subsection 4.
All right, Barbara has made an amended motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
Meg has a second. Is there any further discussion or need for clarification? Seeing none, All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa, for that wordsmithing, and Meg for bringing that forward and keeping our boat upright.
Good job.
So now I'd like to go to agenda item M with Eric, talking about how we get together.
Great. Thank you, co-chairs, members of the board. For the record, again, it's Eric Hartstein, Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator. So this should be a fun topic. So prior to the COVID pandemic, as many of you know, OWEB would hold quarterly board meetings in person at locations around the state. Of course, with the onset of the pandemic in 2020, board meetings moved entirely to a virtual format. But as the pandemic restrictions began to ease, the board has discussed options for meetings moving forward, including the benefits of meeting virtually, as there are costs, both environmental and financial, with meeting in person, and the benefits of meeting in person, as it's really important, as I'm sure you all would agree, to interact with your fellow board members, OWEB staff, and the ability to meet stakeholders face-to-face in their communities and participate in events like site tours. The topic was brought before the board in October of 2021, and then again in January of 2022. And at the January meeting, the board adopted a meeting format for the year that included virtual only meetings in January and April of 2022, and hybrid meetings, which were in person with an option for board members to participate virtually in July and October of 2022. Should also point out that there was wide agreement that the January board meetings going forward should remain virtual given travel constraints in winter. So staff have been planning on the January meeting being virtual as we go forward. As a part of the January decision, the board wished to revisit the format after a year to discuss options moving forward. So to recap, over the past year, the board has met virtually twice, and then in person in Enterprise in July and Tillamook in October. So given July and October were in person this past year, we're also planning on those meetings being in person with, of course, a virtual option to participate. So assuming the board wants to hold at least 2 in-person meetings per year, I think that then raises the question on what to do with the April board meetings. Have them in person or virtual? And I'm anticipating that there will be a question that would come up about this April board meeting, and I'll say that we are prepared to have it either in person in the Salem area or as a virtual only meeting. And with that, I'll give it back to the co-chairs for board discussion.
Thank you, Eric. Steve.
Yeah, just a point that came up yesterday in the public comment about the ability for people to make public comments during the virtual meeting. I don't know what the law is, but technologically, it's extremely easy to do that. I sit on another board, and at the beginning of that board meeting, people are given an email that they could send to the attendees, or they can actually raise their hand during a topic, and as part of the process, they can be the meeting host can tap them, and they can give a public comment right at the same time. So I think one could technologically make public comment extremely easy during our meetings without having to sign up days in advance. I don't know what the legal thing is, but technically it's extremely easy to do.
Okay, thank you. Mark. And then
So I support January meetings being held in Northeast Oregon, and the worst, probably January 15th, and in-person meetings required by everybody. So
Well, it's snowing right now, so just ski right in.
I totally support the virtual meetings in January for the reasons we've all indicated in the past. But I also, and people already probably know this, but I strongly support hybrid meetings for the other three options or other three quarters. And the reason is because it is so important, I believe, that we get out and visit some of the projects that we see. It's important that we continue to build relationships with our board members. And while virtual is okay, it's sure nice to shake somebody's hand and maybe have a beer in the evening and talk about things that are important to us all, build relationships among all of us. And I think it, not that we're not productive with our meetings virtually, but I think having in-person meetings is very valuable. So I support April being a meeting, and if we can make a tour or have people come in and share what they're doing in that area of the state that we're visiting, I strongly support that. And I was a member of, or still a member of this group before 2020, when we were doing this, and just found it hugely productive for me personally. And I think for all of us, I think we very much enjoyed going around the state and talking to people that we're giving money to and having our meetings in other parts of the state. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Chris.
Thanks, Liza. Generally echoing what we just heard from Mark. I support as many in-person board meetings as we can. I am supportive of keeping the January, though, virtual, but for our other quarterly board meetings, as still a relatively new board member, and knowing we have a number of other new board members, I think it's vitally important to get some face time together to get to know each other more offline, and the productivity that brings, as well as the point that Mark made about connecting more with the communities we're trying to support through OWEB in the board and staff activities. So that's my position on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Bruce, and then Barbara.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with Mark on the reasons why we should have the in-person meetings. That said, I think it is absolutely imperative that we, going forward, that the hybrid, the virtual only, or the virtual is an available option for every board meeting moving forward for individual board members, so that they can participate, fully participate without traveling. I like the idea on the meeting, for instance, if we were to have a meeting in Enterprise, while I think Liza Jane and those who can get there, some of us might look at that mileage and say, you know, I don't want to do that to my carbon footprint, but I'll do the one in Tillamook. And Liza Jane may choose not to make that trip. So as long as we have board members, although she'll still come because it's the coast, but as long as we have board members there to interact with our grantees and people applying, bring their projects forward, I think it's all those good reasons that Mark presented, I agree with. I think a couple in-person meetings a year is enough. So to have two, to have every other meeting, have maybe the spring, the fall meeting in person is enough of an expense. Just to put the money on the ground in a project and not spend the carbon. So I would vote for 2 a year to meet the needs that Mark talked about, but virtual option, always 2 a year would be my vote.
Thank you, Bruce. Barbara, then Greg, and then Lindsay.
So Bruce, I think there's a new law that just came that all public meetings have to have the virtual option regardless. So that moving forward will always be an option, always from now on. So I've said this from day one, since we started this conversation, I feel like it's our obligation to tour the state and see these important projects that are happening. We're the ones that are approving the spending plan, and to see the projects and to support the people doing all the work goes a long way. So what was I gonna say? And then I'm thinking, so just as a co-chair, this particular meeting, you wouldn't believe what Liza, Jane, and I have to do behind the scenes virtually. It's a lot of work. Just from, I know we're only 2 out of the whole board, but there was a lot of conversation going on in the back. And if we were sitting next to each other, it would have been a heck of a lot easier to have, because of the timing. We're managing a meeting. So just the whole back and forth of making sure we're on schedule, because all of our time is important. So that's why another reason I support in person. I also think about this coming April and the spending plan, and that to me would be a lot of work on a screen. So those are just my comments.
Thank you, Barbara. Greg.
Thanks. Just to pile on so that staff has no clear direction on this issue. I will say that I think they should all be an in-person option. And I'm also going to say this with a grain of salt, because I may not be here much longer. So I will caveat it with that. But I mean, if these meetings are a half a day, that's one thing. I just find these hugely difficult to maintain focus. I get emails coming in, I'm checking. It's just, and that's maybe a me problem, but I think an in-person option for each meeting, even if it's twice a year in Salem, so it's, not as much of a burden for staff. I just think for me, that would be a better way for me to participate.
Thank you. Lindsay and then Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I don't know if we're going to get majority or even consensus or anything like that, but I would just throw out there that I like the January idea of virtual. It's hard to replace in person. I think that there's such a value there. However, I will say that having at least one, if not 2 virtuals, really puts us in the driver's seat of our climate resolution. And I think that we can't ask others to dig deeper without us digging deeper as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. Kelly.
Well, Lindsay basically said exactly what I was going to say. I was going to channel Brenda McComb a little bit here on our climate resolution, and just remind folks that that's also part of the decision here. But I think if we maintain the ability for hybrid, that helps us get to that climate initiative as well. So just want to keep that in the back of everyone's mind. I too think it's important to be in person and to be able to see the projects and have the interactions with folks. So I would be supportive of hybrid options for the April, July, and October / in-person. And then I do like January being virtual just because of travel, and you never know. So.
Good, thank you. I'll chime in, and I'd like to start with I recall 2 times, once before I was on the board a long time ago, and this last summer when OWEB came to town. And trust me, this is from the town perspective. It's a big deal. It really means a lot to people. They still talk about it, especially in a small community. It means a lot to our partners, but it means a lot to everybody in the community, where our name might be up on a sign somewhere or something, but who are we and what do we represent? And when you see us and talk with us, you get a good feel of that. And so it's important to the people in the community. I agree with Greg. I think in person is just invaluable, and our responsibility. I support that for reducing our carbon footprint. And I support Barbara for, what we're wiggling around back here. I don't know that we do as good a job virtually with everyone. And I'm watching you, and people are not engaged as well. You can't be fooling around with 16 devices when you're in view, right? So I think we do really good as a board, staying connected and getting through this, and listening to each other. But I notice when we're in person, it's different. So my question would be, before I say my full position, is how about for staff? And we're trying to help our staff with capacity issues and getting the work that they're required to do. Eric, can you tell me what it is like to pull, and April, all of you pull off in person versus virtual for you?
Yeah, thanks, Liza Jane, for that question. I'll chime in first, and then April, I'd love to hear you comment as well. A lot of this is the same amount of work as we're preparing for board meetings. We have the board books, presentations. That's the same if it's virtual or in person. What's different with in person, of course, is opportunities for site visits, the logistics around meeting facility, hotel, vehicle, rentals. So on one hand, they're very similar when it comes to preparing for, but I think it's the logistics side that it's a little bit more work. But I will let April, if you're online right now, April, you can chime in. I saw you go off mute for a second. Okay, well, April might not have the ability to chime in right now. So yeah, I would say that there are some logistical challenges, of course, with in-person meetings, but there's also, as we've talked about yesterday, there's challenges with accepting public comment for virtual only meetings, and sometimes it's much easier when folks are in person or able to fill out a little yellow form the day of the board meeting.
Thank you, Eric. I also think there's communities in Oregon that don't do this, that we really want to reach out to and get involved. And a virtual meeting is not as commonplace as maybe we think it is, because we're involved with it all the time. And to walk into a building in a room and listen to us, for some is still, the old school way. So I want to see us keep doing that. So my position would be to not have to leave home unless I'm going to Mexico in January, and have our three meetings as a hybrid. I think it's really important.
So hold on, Liza Jane, before you call upon Jamie, April is now back online if she wants.
Oh, good.
Has anything she'd like to add? So you're on mute, April. All right, maybe not.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes. Did you hear our question,
Sorry about
April?
that. Yeah, I did. Sorry, I got
Okay.
disconnected. So I just wanted to reiterate what Eric said, as far as the work with online versus in person. There's so much benefits to the in person, but yes, logistically there is a little bit more work that is involved for staff, but I also see the value of being meeting in person as well. So.
Okay, thank you. Jamie.
I think a lot of important comments have been made, just two others that I think are worth noting. In a lot of rural areas have challenges with broadband access still. And so that also speaks to that accessibility. Also, we hear a lot and talk a lot about the urban rural divide, and more often meetings, even the meetings that are talked about are often talked about being Portland or Salem. And it is important to make sure there's that staff are factored into the conversation about making it possible to do this work. I think showing up, especially in rural communities like Liza J mentioned, and in different parts of the state, really gives that sense, Greg mentioned as well, that sense of showing up and government coming to people, being accessible. And so those things I think really speak to the philosophy of the organization. So a lot of great comments, I think, but also Kelly's comments and Lindsay's comments about footprint, the greenhouse gas emissions, all those things factor in. So having the options, I think, is important. But those other factors I just hadn't heard mentioned yet, and I think they're important to consider.
Thank you, Jamie. Something else we've talked about is extending our in-person occasionally, that time when we're arriving on a Monday afternoon. Can we do some training? Can we do something for those who can make that, and maybe make that trip a little more productive? That's just something that comes up once in a while, that we may be able to add value to those in-person meetings as well in the future. Lisa.
Thanks. So just a couple things for consideration. We do have to have all of the future board meetings hybrid so that they're accessible to everyone. I think we would need to have, going to more in-person meetings, which is fine, have commitment that people are going to be there though, because it is a lot of work to put together the meetings and then at the last minute have things come up and only have a couple of board members show up. That concerns me. And so, figuring out how we would have commitment for some substantive mass is pretty important. Generally what I've heard, and I've heard it all the way around, it seems like the majority of people, and we could do a straw poll of some kind. I think that was Mark's suggestion to me, to get a sense for, I've heard 3 hybrid, but I do think there needs to be some consideration to making sure we have a critical mass of people in attendance.
Okay.
So sorry, Liza Jane. I would suggest, since we have our dates picked already for the year, is maybe there's a doodle poll, whether it's in person or virtual, that people would know that now, since our date's already picked, or some sort of, like you said, straw poll, or just, so April can get a count on virtual versus in person.
So if we were to hold April, because we have places planned for July and October, I think July in Sisters, October in Klamath, because of the big investments there, we thought that was a good idea. April in Salem, because it's still going to be the legislative session. How many people would plan to attend in Salem?
Should we raise our hands with a virtual hand?
Yeah, just wants to raise her hand, put her hand up.
Yeah, a hand up is fine. I mean, I think it's just kind of a general sense of it. Yeah.
Quick thought, since
Yeah.
there will always be sessions, why
Yep.
not always have the April meeting around the Salem area?
We could do
Quick
that, and
thought.
then the others farther away. There's a lot of critical mass in the Willamette Valley too, which helps limit some of the travel. It's the majority of people generally. It looks like Bruce and Gary probably not, and maybe not Liz for April.
And not Meg, sorry. And not Meg would be virtual.
Okay. Okay. So I would lean towards trying April in person in Salem this year for 2023, and let's see how it goes. And when we get towards the end of the year, we can check again and determine if it's too much burden or not. How's that?
That sounds good. I think we're okay. Does let me know if anybody has strong feelings against doing that. And we can continue to talk about it. It looks like we're good, Lisa. Eric?
Can you reiterate where you were thinking for October, Lisa? Was that Klamath Falls?
October, Klamath Falls.
Thank you.
July and Sisters.
Okay. As we move towards wrapping this up today, Lisa, do you have any closing comments?
Thank you for a very productive board meeting. I hope everybody enjoyed the updates on FIPS. I know I did. And it's been a good series of discussions, I think, thinking about FIPS, how we approach them. I may reach out to some of you to talk just a little bit about spending plan before we roll something out for the April board meeting, trying to find the sweet spot with it. So, if you have some thoughts you want to share with me, you know where to find me. But I, as always, appreciate your time. And these meetings are hard. It's a long day and our agendas are always packed. And we keep trying to do a little bit of modification to add time, but it seems like we get off on something and somehow we get close to being back on track at the end. It's just hard to tell sometimes how long some of the conversations are really going to go as you lay out the agendas. So thank you for your patience and flexibility and all of your input throughout this process.
Thank you, Lisa. And Liz.
Hey, I just want to take a moment to say thank you for inviting me. And in Seaside is when I met Bruce. And Brenda came over to me in the social and said, you have to meet this person. And Brenda was radiant. I mean, she had this radiant smile, walked me over to Bruce and said, this is Bruce, and you're going to be working with them on the board, and you're going to really enjoy the board. And that has been true. And today, I just have been tracking sort of the tone, not just the work, but also the tone, and just been so happy to see your approach for dialogue and problem solving with each other and with your partners, because, listening to the reports out, it has resulted in such intentional and good work on the landscape. Because I think that's not just the work, but how you all approach it. And the phrase to me that has been coming to mind this afternoon is a rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that rising tide is how you do your work, not just the good work, but how you do it with each other. So I just wanted to say that, and I'm just really enthusiastic. I'm tired, but I'm a good tired today. And so I just want to say thank you for making today so welcoming, and I'm looking forward for the next few years.
Thank you, Liz. I was going to tell you specifically, thank you for jumping right in with us. And I think we're all feeling really fortunate that you're part of our board and look forward to everything that you'll bring. I also want to thank all the board members this afternoon for the work you do for OWEB outside of our board meeting. In your committees are active and they're productive. The other work you do in your work life for our land in Oregon and everything that lives here. Thank you for that. and our incredible staff. Liz, part of the reason this board is just the best board I've served on is because of our staff. They make this so easy on us and support us and keep us informed and work so hard. I always picture, the duck on top of the water that's just going like mad and looking all cool on top. And that's our staff. And they have a tremendous workload. And I just want to really, really hope you hear me. Thank you for what you do. If nobody has any other closing comments.
I have one closing comment for Liz.
Please.
Liz, we're better in person.
I believe that.
Just kidding.
I thought it was going to be, we're supposed to tease Bruce, not compliment him.
All right, everybody. Well, be well, be safe, and we'll talk soon.